It's 7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvita Neja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global, bringing you the day's big stories from across India and the world. Joining me also is my colleague Benji Haya from Washington, D.C. Good to have you, Benji, with us.
Good morning, Tanvi. Yes, 9 a.m. here in Washington, 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, the latest on the West's reaction to the death of Alexei Navalny, sanctions imposed on Russia as its war with Ukraine enters its third year, and also the latest from the conflict on the ground between Israel and Gaza. But first, the headlines, and back to you.
At the 9th Raisina dialogue, Greece's Prime Minister says strengthening partnership with India should be the cornerstone of Europe's foreign policy, reaffirms India as a consensus builder and voice of reason in an increasing polarized world. UK sanctions 6 prison heads of the Arctic penal colony where Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died. US and EU too decide to impose major sanctions on Moscow over Navalny's death. And the United States urges the International Court of Justice not to order unconditional withdrawal of Israeli troops from Palestinian territories, stresses the need to consider Israel's security. So our first news from New Delhi. India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy was concluded in capital New Delhi, the 9th Raisina dialogue. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the 3-day Raisina dialogue. Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, was the chief guest of the inaugural session, and he delivered the keynote address where he spoke about strengthening partnership with India, which he said should be the cornerstone of Europe's foreign policy.
Strengthening our partnership with India, and I'm speaking about Europe, should be a cornerstone of Europe's foreign policy. And this is certainly true for my country. We have made good progress over the past years towards achieving that goal, but we have much further to go. And Greece has an important role in this endeavor.
The Greece's Prime Minister, in his address, also spoke of reforms of international institutions such as that of the United Nations, and he favoured India to be represented at the UN Security Council.
Whether at the United Nations, where Greece is seeking a rotating seat on the Security Council next year, at the G20, which was so expertly chaired by India last year, or through the European Union. And by the way, Greece is supporting the reform of the Security Council of the United Nations in order for leading countries such as India to be represented at the highest table and in order for their voice to be heard.
So addressing the Raisina dialogue, Kyriakos Mitsotakis further said that the war in Ukraine is much more than a local war on European soil and termed it as a brutal challenge to international stability.
We Europeans do apply double standards, focusing on Ukraine at the expense of wars and crises in the rest of the world. And maybe there is truth in that allegation. But I would like to make the point here in Delhi that Ukraine is much more than a local war on European soil. It is a brutal challenge to international stability and the international rules-based order that India has supported and has every interest in maintaining. And I think we all have a responsibility to use the power we have on the international stage. And none of us can afford to sit on the sidelines. And I'm convinced that on Ukraine, India has an important role to play. It has a voice that should be heard.
Further, the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic described India as a consensus builder and voice of reason in an increasingly polarized world.
When it comes to shaping the direction of the global debate and addressing the great challenges that we face, India is now often regarded, and rightly so, as a consensus builder and as a voice of reason in an increasingly polarized world. And we too often forget that the raison d'etre, the real reason why the international system was created in the first place, was simple, because nations large and small recognized that their true interest lay ultimately not in antagonism and in conflict, but in partnership and cooperation. And we cannot afford to overlook the cost of conflict and the human tragedy and suffering it unleashes. And this 9th edition of the Raisina Dialogue is taking place at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar thanked Greece's Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis for his address at the 9th Raisina Dialogue.
Our collective appreciation to Prime Minister Mitsotakis for what I'm confident all of you will agree was a truly inspirational and thought-provoking address. His message of democracies that deliver resonates strongly, particularly now, particularly here. Prime Minister Modi's presence amongst us, as always, is a reminder of India's growing engagement with the world, especially in the last decade. He has shown us why it is as important to listen and reflect as it is to articulate and express.
So this 9th Raisina Dialogue continues from today, that's Wednesday, till Friday, February the 23rd. Earlier in the day, India's External Affairs Ministry briefed media on the state visit of Prime Minister of Greece to India. Addressing media, Foreign Secretary of India, Vinay Quatra, said Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement is in the advanced stage to be finalized in the months ahead.
An important element of people-to-people ties that was emphasized by both the leaders in terms of our efforts to structure that cooperation is Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement, an area where there is complementarity of interest. It's in advanced stages of consideration, and we expect that this agreement could be finalized in months ahead.
On to the Israel-Hamas conflict now. The United States has urged the International Court of Justice to not order the unconditional withdrawal of Israeli forces from Palestinian territories and to consider Israel's security as well. My colleague Benji Haya is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Benji, in principle, United States echoing the calls for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza.
It is, yes, but it's putting forward its own proposals to the United Nations, and it's still urging the World Court not to order the unconditional withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, as you say. That statement coming as the UN's top court was asked to issue a non-binding advisory opinion on charges against Israel in respect to those Palestinian territories. Israel warns the legal hearing would hindrance a potential of reaching a deal, a negotiation, but the ICJ is hearing arguments from 52 countries and 3 international organisations. It's the largest number of parties to participate in any such single case. This as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Wednesday. That was in advance of a G20 foreign ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro. Officials here say they expect the two men to have a robust conversation on issues of global security, including the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. On that, Israel Defense Forces continue their operations against Hamas in Gaza despite that ICJ pressure. Israel's vowed to press on into the very south of the Strip, where 1.5 million Palestinians, many displaced, are gathered. The US insists Israel needs a plan to evacuate civilians before any advance. The IDF says it is targeting terrorist infrastructure. The war's escalated region-wide. Yemen's rebel Houthi group, which says it supports Hamas, launched another missile attack against a ship in the Gulf of Aden as the Red Sea meets the Indian Ocean. The Iran-backed militant organisation, designated as terrorists by the United States, has this week continued maritime assaults against international vessels in what it claims is an act of solidarity with Palestinians under siege. Western nations have responded in recent weeks and months with airstrikes. Those have failed, though, to deter the Houthi attacks. The Greek flag vessel, the Sea Champion, did successfully arrive in the southern Yemeni port of Aden after a mistaken missile strike by Houthi militia in the Red Sea. The ship, ferrying corn from Argentina, was attacked twice on Monday. No crew were injured. Another conflict, this one entering its third year soon. At least 6 people injured overnight in an attack by Russian drones in Ukraine's Donetsk region. Firefighters there carrying out rescue operations in a damaged residential area that has felt the full brunt of violence. The European Union's called for an independent and transparent international investigation into circumstances that led to the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Russia's representative to the bloc was summoned to Brussels, where he was urged to release the opposition figure's body to his family without further delay. The Kremlin, meanwhile, continues to insist that Western allegations that President Vladimir Putin was responsible for Navalny's death last week in a Russian prison are, quote, unacceptable. The European Union also approved its 13th sanctions package against Moscow since its conflict with Ukraine. That package will be formally approved on February 24th, the second anniversary of the start of the conflict. Britain on Wednesday also imposed sanctions on 6 individuals in charge of the Arctic penal colony where Navalny died. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron confirming those sanctions will be banned from the UK and will have their assets frozen. Meanwhile, the US on Friday will unveil another major package of sanctions against Russia following Navalny's death. These latest ones will target Russian defence and industrial bases, along with sources of revenue for the economy. A war of words has broken out between current President Joe Biden, the resident of the building behind me, and his rival for the Oval Office, Donald Trump, over the circumstances that transpired following Navalny's death. Former President Trump, who's vying for the White House again and has praised Putin during his tenure in the White House, compared his legal woes of late to the treatment of Navalny. He called Navalny a very brave man who probably should not have returned to Russia. Trump's successor, President Biden, has thrashed his Republican rival's response, claiming Trump always blames America. A fight between Spanish farmers and police broke out on Wednesday as weeks of protests continue in Europe, with farmers in the continent demanding reform in the European Union's common agricultural policy. Farmers across Europe are refuting the agricultural policy and bloc's environmental rules. French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, in an effort to ease tensions with farmers, promised a new law to favour their income. Protests have also broken out across Hungary. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Benji, with all those updates. Benji Haya joining us all from Washington, D.C. You're watching Did India Global, still to come on the show. Pakistan's largest political parties, the PPP and the PMLN, strike deal on coalition government. Shehbaz Sharif to be the coalition's candidate for Prime Minister. In yet another rescue effort, Indian Navy's INS Shivalik rendered medical assistance to an Iranian fishing vessel in the Gulf of Aden.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. India's Minister of State for External Affairs, V. Muralidharan, reached Brazil on Wednesday. The minister will represent India at the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting and the IBSA Foreign Ministers meeting. The two-day G20 Foreign Ministers meeting is being held in Rio de Janeiro. The minister will also hold bilateral meetings with his partner countries from the Global South. During his visit, the minister will participate in two key sessions, including G20's role in dealing with ongoing international tensions and global governance reform. Further, V. Muralidharan will also attend the India-Brazil-South Africa Foreign Ministers meeting on 22nd of February this year. The Indian Navy on Wednesday said that its warship INS Shivalik, deployed in the Gulf of Aden, provided medical assistance to an Iranian fishing vessel on 19th of February. The move came after the mission received an alert of a medical emergency by the Iranian vessel carrying 18 Pakistani crew. INS Shivalik provided specialist medical advice and critical medicines to the distressed crew. Banas Dairy of India, which is said to be the largest in Asia, is all set to increase its footprint in the eastern part of the country. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi would dedicate the dairy plant to the nation on 24th of February. The dairy was launched in 1969 as part of the Operation Flood program and is popularly known as Amul globally. Packaging milk inside this high-tech plant, this dairy in Varanasi focuses on the scientific methods of animal husbandry. It collects milk from the 8 districts of the eastern part of Uttar Pradesh, which is also the most populated state of India. Collecting around 3 lakh litres of milk every day, the dairy has registered 80,000 milk-producing families. The dairy is aimed at empowering women in the region. This Banas Dairy is a success story of the Cooperative Milk Society in India.
And currently I am doing testing of raw milk, means testing of a tanker which comes from Mirzapur MCC, means milk chilling center. And I am testing first, this is a FT3 machine. It's mainly used for testing of a basic component of milk, that is fat, snuff, acidity, TS, protein, lactose, which is a chemical compound present in a milk.
On to neighbouring Pakistan, 2 major political parties have finally reached an agreement to form a coalition government. The Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz Party will be backed by the Pakistan People's Party in a new administration they have jointly announced. In a joint news conference late on Tuesday night, Pakistan People's Party chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari announced that Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz President Shehbaz Sharif would be the coalition's candidate for the post of Prime Minister and that the parties would push to form the government as soon as possible. He also added that his father, Asif Ali Zardari, will be the alliance's candidate for the country's president.
Party or Muslim League Nawaz?
I can share with you that the Pakistan People's Party and the Muslim League Nawaz have enough numbers now, and God willing, now we'll be able to work on forming a government. Now Pakistan People's Party and Muslim League Nawaz are going to form a government. We are hoping that now, God willing, Shehbaz Sharif will once again become the Prime Minister of the country very soon. We and the entire nation are praying that this government should be successful and that we should be able to resolve our internal issues, our foreign issues, and the economic problems of every Pakistani with the help of Allah. God willing, a joint candidate for the presidency of Pakistan will be President Zardari.
Staying in Asia, China-Taiwan relations are under strain after the Taiwan Coast Guards on Tuesday drove away a Chinese Coast Guard boat that entered waters near its sensitive frontline islands. But the Taiwanese Defense Ministry informed that they are not stepping up the military on the Kinmen Islands following this incident.
Tensions between China and Taiwan have been intensifying with each passing day. In the recent clash between the two countries, Taiwan drove away a Chinese Coast Guard boat that entered waters near the sensitive Kinmen Islands. Taiwan's Coast Guard said in a statement that it dispatched a boat and used radio and broadcast to drive away the Chinese boat, which left the area an hour later. Meanwhile, Taiwan has not increased military deployments on the frontline islands facing China, and there is nothing unusual in the military situation around Taiwan. Island's defense minister briefed the legislative yuan about the incident, where he termed the entire matter as a judicial case.
This incident is currently being handled by the Coast Guard from the perspective of a judicial case. The Ministry of Defense will not directly intervene to avoid escalating any local tensions.
Chinese interference in Taiwanese waters comes just days after China's Coast Guard boarded a Taiwanese tourist boat near Taiwan-controlled islands next to China's coast. Head of the Taiwan's Ocean Affairs Council had earlier said that such actions of China have harmed the Taiwanese people's feelings and triggered panic. Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory despite the island's rejection, has been wary of efforts by Beijing to ramp up pressure on Taipei following the elections last month of Lai Ching-te as president, a man Beijing views as a dangerous separatist.
Now, amidst the trainee doctor strike in South Korea against a government plan to boost medical school admissions, the country's biggest hospitals are turning away patients due to shortage of staff. The South Korean government is planning to boost the number of medical students to improve healthcare staffing, but the protesters say that South Korea has enough doctors and that the government needs to address working conditions and pay. And we now take a look at other stories making news around the world. Turkey's fifth-generation fighter jet completed its first flight on Wednesday as part of the country's efforts to upgrade its air force. Turkey launched its TFX project to produce a national combat aircraft in 2016. The room in Belgium where a US Army officer, General Anthony Meoliff, who helped turn around the country's bloodiest battle of the Second World War and refused to surrender, has been opened to the public for the first time. The Bastogne War Rooms include an immersive exhibition space as well as a visit to Meoliff's cellar in an unremarkable barrack in the wooded Ardennes region. Japanese artist Yoshuki launched his fashion brand Maison Yoshuki Paris at the Milan Fashion Week on Tuesday. The show featured over 30 looks of glamorous and genderless designs. As described by the artist, the collection was created to be flamboyant with a rebellious touch. Spring-like weather is spoiling the fun of usual winter activities of visitors to Bosnia's Mount Blasnica. After a warm December, skiers on the 2,067-meter mountain near the Bosnian capital Sarajevo enjoyed a few weeks of colder weather and some snow in January. But in February, the ski trails stand with scarce snow and muddy pistes. The second day of the Singapore Air Show was attended by the world's leading aircraft manufacturers and industry leaders. Among the participating teams are also the Indian Air Force's Sarang aerobatic team. Sarang showcases the lightweight helicopters developed by the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited of India. The event exhibits not only the capabilities of the aircrafts of the world, but also the abilities of their pilots operating them. And as we wind up today's edition of DD India Global, we sadly inform you that India's legendary radio personality Amin Sayani passed away on Tuesday at the age of 91. The iconic radio presenter hosted the popular show Binaka Geet Mala, which was broadcast since 1952, mainly over Radio Ceylon and later over Vividh Bharati for 42 long years. India's President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressed condolences to his family, admirers and all radio lovers. For some, radio was synonymous with Sayani's voice.
ज़िंदगी में भी और स्टेज पर भी काफ़ी ड्रामे कर चुका हूँ मैं, तो लिहाजा बिना स्क्रिप्ट के पढ़ने की आदत है। वैसे रेडियो में हालांकि स्क्रिप्ट होती है सामने, अच्छा अनाउंसर वही होता है जो यूं।
That's all in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks air on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.